Okay. All right. Well, welcome everybody. I'm so excited y'all are here. So, like 5 years ago, CASA did a panel on Zoom for our advocate training. And so this part of your last session of advocate training was to watch the panel discussion that was with all the different stakeholders in the child welfare system here in Hill County. And so watching it during one of our last trainings, I realized it was very outdated. And some of the players had changed and laws had changed and all of those things. And so we decided to go ahead and update it. So y'all are here getting to see it live, and we're recording it for future advocates and current advocates for continuing education. So I really appreciate y'all taking time out of your evening to be here. I know that y'all would rather be at home in your jammies or eating dinner or whatever. So we really appreciate that. And our goal is just to give y'all that behind the scenes look of the different players and participants in the child welfare system. And so I'm going to let the panelists each introduce themselves and tell us what role they play in the child welfare system and maybe, you know, anything else you want us to know about you. So we'll start with you, Katie.
My name is Katie Bowman. I'm the CPS Investigations Supervisor for Hill, Bosque, and Hamilton counties. I've been with CPS for, well, next week will be 26 years. All of that has been covering Hill County in different capacities, but came back to a supervisor role 5 years ago.
Might help the recording. Okay.
It's better. Hi, my name is Matt Crane. I'm the judge of the county court of law here in the county. And I hear all the CPS cases. I went to A&M for my grad and Baylor for my law degree, and I was licensed in 01. Practice, general practice, which mainly included family law, criminal law, and with CPS cases. I was in law for children. I represented parents. So I've been in the shoes of some of those that are here with me today. And you know, I've been doing this for now my 11th year. But yeah, it's awesome.
Stephanie Johnson. I'm currently representing the children. I graduated from Baylor University and then went to law school at Baylor. Got licensed in 2000 and came to Hill County in 2001. And I represented parents for 19, 20 years and children. In the last 4 or 5 years, I've just done children.
I'm Dana Tipton, and I'm a CASA advocate. So I'm doing it for about 4 years now, and just working with kids.
My name is Mary Abbott. I am the CPS regional attorney for Hill County. I do also handle other counties within Region 7 of the department that I am what's called director at for Hill County, as I am the only CPS attorney representing the department. I grew up in California, graduated from California State University, Chico in 1990. I was a litigation paralegal and a court liaison for State Farm and Farmers Insurance before I went to law school. I went to Texas Wesleyan Law School in downtown Fort Worth. I was in their night program because I had to work full time during the day. Graduated in 2005. I have been primarily practicing as a assistant district and county attorney, representing CPS in some capacity. I've also been in private practice representing parents with CPS and children, and I came on as a regional attorney in March of this year.
All right. Well, we'll pass it back down here to Katie. We'll start with the beginning of a case. Starts with a intake call and with investigation. So can you kind of walk us through what the role of CPS investigator looks like from the moment you receive a report?
So whoever makes a call to the intake hotline, and those reports come directly to me through other people, but then they come directly to me. So as the supervisor, I assign those cases to the caseworkers that are in the unit. And then the first thing that we do is review that, information, contact whoever the reporter might be, review any history that the family has with the department. And then our essential role is to speak to the children and the families. We're their direct line. We're the ones who are making contact in the homes and the schools and interviewing children, connecting families to services, setting up additional interviews like forensic interviews at the advocacy center, and or connecting families to some kind of resources in the community, depending on whether there's problems or not. If we go investigate a case and we don't find any abuse or neglect, then we're gonna go away as quickly as we can, and typically that's in less than 30 days. But if we determine that there are problems, then we have two options, and that is to send a case to Family-Based Safety Services, where investigations does all the pre-work, and then it goes to Family-Based Safety Services to continue working with the family. Or we end up in a situation where children are removed from the home, and at that point, we put everything together to present to the court for removal. But we're the ones who are communicating with our partners out in the community about a family and who's interacting with them, and communicating with law enforcement and other entities in the community that help us determine whether there's problems or not.
So how does your work intersect with CASA volunteers, and what kind of collaboration do you find the most helpful?
Well, I think it's unique, in the three different counties that I cover, because they're all three rural areas. It's a little different than working in a big city. So typically the CASA volunteers in my rural areas are also people in the community. And so they know people, they know of other people. They're real connected to things that are going on around us as well. They're not just somebody who lives over there that no one ever knows. And so typically the CASA role only connects with us once we're involved with the court. That's how the process is set out to be. But fortunately for me, we have connections in other ways too. So sometimes CASA is able to help us, gather information in some circumstances if they know the family or if they've known of the family. Sometimes CASA is contacting us about families that they're concerned about or worried about and think that we should, make contact with. So I always have I try my best to always have an open line of communication with CASA. Because I definitely see the value of them playing a different role than what I play. Oftentimes we see it as like the good cop, bad cop, and we're typically the bad cop. So if we can have someone else who can communicate with our kids and our families from a different perspective, a lot of times we're able to get information that helps us to be able to, meet the needs of the family outside of what information we obtain directly.
Okay, so here's kind of we're gonna ask you a hard question for us to hear, maybe.
Okay.
So are there ways that CASA can better support your work and improve that communication?
Well, I think the answer probably would be patience. But honestly, I feel that way about a lot of things even myself, honestly, if I can't just put that on y'all. But I think once we get involved and there's problems and CASA is appointed to represent, these children and these families, a lot of times people want to know things really fast, and they want to know, like, what are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing? And I get it, because I feel that way too. But sometimes we have to remember that we have to take a step back and slow down, because these families aren't running at the pace that we're running at. We see a problem and can think of, potentially 3 or 4 solutions. But our children and our parents are seeing the problem, and all they're seeing most of the time is that CPS is at my doorstep.
Right.
And they're not always thinking about a resolution. And for kids, we have to give them a minute to acclimate to what's going on. And sometimes that patience is a hard thing.
Okay, we're gonna give you a break. We're gonna come back to you. All right, Judge Crane, what are the biggest challenges you see in cases involving children in foster care?
So my answer is going to focus on foster care. It's obviously whenever a child is removed, you're looking for family or fictive kin But if those options are not available, then it reverts to foster care. My biggest challenge that I see is just the sheer lack of foster families that are available in this area. That in and of itself presents a problem, because if we're having to place a child in Houston or San Antonio or 4 hours away, that's hard for visits to occur. That is, a lot of times it's hard for the department, because those kids are now in a different region, and we're having to get courtesy workers to visit those children. And so sometimes there is a gap in the communication. And I'm not saying it's inaccurate, but I will say that it presents the opportunity for inaccuracies, or it creates bigger hurdles for parents maybe to overcome, to try to work their services. So in and of itself, I would say just we need more foster parents.
Mhm. I agree. I tell that to everybody who, they're like, what's the biggest thing you need? Foster parents? And then they look at me like, I don't want to.
What else?
I'm like, okay, well,
To follow up on that, and I know this probably isn't anything CASA can do, but, I know one of the other questions was, what can our community do
Mhm.
to, better serve the child welfare system? And maybe if you're not equipped or feel called to be a foster family, I do think it has to be a calling for sure. But maybe somebody in your church is, or maybe somebody in some organization that you're involved in is willing to do that. So at that point, I think your church or organization needs to rally around that family and provide support to them and encouragement to them to do it. And I think that's an avenue that hopefully we can explore in our, to help improve our community.
Absolutely. So, what factors do you weigh most heavily when making decisions about reunification or termination of parental rights?
Well, the factors are always going to be dependent upon each case, because there are cases where we have sobriety as an issue. There are cases where we have low IQ as an issue. Those are the really hard ones, probably. You have families that just don't know any better. They don't know how to care for a kid. But overall, I would say, as a general rule, stability and sobriety. And if you can demonstrate stability and sobriety, those are probably two of the most common factors that need to be considered.
How do CASA advocates impact your decision-making process?
Well, for one, I'm very appreciative of the role of CASA funds. All the parties that are involved in the case have different roles. And we're all trying to end up at the same place. Everybody wants what's in the best interest of the child, well, they should. And it's how you get there sometimes isn't always the path that everybody wants you to go. Basically, CASA, the more, from my perspective, I'm looking at a photo album, and everybody's taking snapshots. And so the more detailed CASA can be on the day-to-day activities and the day-to-day routine of not only the children, but maybe of the parents, maybe of the foster situation, whatever the issues in the case will be, give me more pictures so that I can make a better decision when I look at the photo album as to what's in the best interest of this child. But I will say that CASA's reports are very valuable. Read them usually the day before. So make sure you get them to me at least 2 days prior to the hearing if possible. And sometimes these cases are fluid and there are last minute details and changes and truths that occur. And those have to be amended and can definitely be presented in court through testimony, but I do value the reports. I do read the reports. It helps me, refreshes me on the history of the case. It gives me up to date as to who's done what since our last hearing. So that's a good way for me to put myself in a position to make as good of a decision as I can.
Mhm. All right, well, to let you give up the hot seat for a minute. Move on to Stephanie. So Stephanie, can you explain your role as a child's attorney and how it differs from the role of CASA?
So, I'm representing the child, I'm the attorney for the child, and we need a voice for that child. And, I think one of the differences that I have to remind people is, if that child understands the role of the attorney at law and can make, you know, it's not a 3-year-old, it might be a 10-year-old and have some valuable information that they want me to advocate for. If they understand the role of the attorney, client confidentiality and the role of an attorney in the case, I've got to advocate for that child because it comes into play, especially the teenagers, because we all know they have they have an opinion and they want it to be heard. And so, I mean, sometimes it might be not be what y'all think's in the best interest of the child, but I've got to advocate for them and I need to be their voice and make sure the judge knows what they want. And, you know, their opinion does matter, especially as they get older. It might not be what's best for them, but they do have an opinion and they are part of the case and they need to be heard also.
So kind of building on that, what strategies do you use to ensure the child's voice is heard in the legal proceeding?
Well, as far as strategies, I mean, I think we've all touched with them. I mean, it is very important to hear from CPS and CASA and all the parties because, you know, we all hear different things and we all need to, you know, have all that information. And so I like to know everybody, you know, what's going on in the case. Also strategies of just talking with the child, getting a rapport with that child so that maybe they won't tell CASA or CPS, then maybe they'll tell me. And different cases, you know, children open up differently, but and then things that I do is sometimes they want to be heard and they want to come to court. Sometimes they just want to meet with the judge privately, and so I've set up times where the judge even talks to the child over Zoom. Sometimes it's in person. Sometimes they want to be in court if they're older and want to be present. So I try to just talk to them and see how they want to be heard and then set that up so that they can be.
How do you prepare children, especially our teens, for court appearances and being involved in their own case?
I mean, I think the main thing is, you know, sometimes it's, we talked about earlier, you know, sometimes these children just don't know. They haven't been taught, they don't have the frontal figures that taught them how to act in public or how to dress or what to say, what to do. So, I mean, I think that just go through general things of, you know, you need to stand when the judge walks in. You need to say, yes, sir, no, your honor, be respectful. You might not like what he has to say, but you'll have your time to talk and you need to listen when he talks and, you know, just trying to prep them how to act in court and how to dress and when to talk and when not to. So,
what makes CASA helpful as you prepare for hearings and things?
Also, it's very helpful. I've been on cases where at one time we didn't have CASA, and I will tell you, it was very hard. It's not very much value. All of y'all's input and things that y'all can provide, because as we talked about, sometimes these children are placed far away, or you know, we're dealing with different counties, and so I think it takes all of us to be able to advocate and figure out what's best for the children. But just, I mean, having y'all's input, I know a lot of times we'll do through an email or a conference call or anything like that, but any information that y'all find, if you just share with the attorneys, don't ever assume that we know it. I think it's helpful for all the parties to communicate, so that we all know what's going on and where we might need, you know, to voice their opinion or get information or anything like that.
All right, we're gonna let you have a break now too. Dana gets to be in the hot seat. So Dana, how many cases have you had with CASA? Okay, yes. Dana is one of our seasoned advocates. And she's had some challenging cases. She's currently on a challenging one. So can you describe your role as CASA and kind of what it looks like for you in how you integrate it in the day-to-day?
So the main goal, is to, or my main goal is to find a child a stable and safe place to be. And so you kind of feel like the eyes, hopefully we can find some trust issues with the child and the parents, especially if they're smaller. But so daily, it's not, well, this time it is daily, but it's just finding time in there and being there, being present for them if they call, if they need something, if they have a question, if they're just wondering what's next, and just be there for them, and hold their hand, in a sense, so that you're present in their life, so that they build the trust with them when it's clear to their family.
What do you feel like is the most difficult part about being a CASA volunteer?
Oh my gosh, probably not, or seeing what you think is not how it should be going, but to be able to put yourself in their shoes and say, okay, we're going to go slower and go at their pace, and still to guide, but not demand or say, this is how it needs to be, but just to really say, we could do this.
So what inspired you to become a CASA?
I wanted to, and I've always wanted to do foster parenting, but then when I started CASA, I had my mom at home, and I had 2 adult children at home, and my husband, and the farm, and so it really wasn't gonna work out for foster parenting, because everybody has to be, they all have to go through what I agreed to, but they didn't. And then, so in the newspaper, there was, we need CASA, we need CASA. I was like, I don't even know what that is, but I'm gonna go see. So it fit for me at the time, because it was just me and not the other 5 adults in my house. So that's what started it.
So how did your training prepare you for your first case?
First, well, it had to just the knowledge that they gave. I was right after the COVID, so I actually had in person, which I am so grateful for, to be able to sit and talk to the trainers and people that knew, had been there before, and their knowledge, just to be able to guide you through, because it's everything just match you, like, what do you do, what do you do with the parents, and what, what do you tell them, so it was just, there was all the information was helpful, stored away.
Why do you think it's important that every child in foster care have a CASA advocate?
Really do think it's very important. Everybody does have one, because with the CPS, they have so many cases, and like when you're the CASA, they're just like your one focus for the time. You just focus on that family and that child or the children. If there's multiple children in that family, sometimes everybody else that's involved, they're so busy, and so many others, and so at least you can be the one that they can always come back to, know who they are, so you can build a trust between you and them personally. It's more personal, I guess.
Very good. Thank you. All right, Mary, your turn to be in the hot seat, although you're just gonna tell us what you're allowed to tell us.
I'll just tell what I do.
Yes.
So I am the attorney representing the department. And my job is Haley down there when she
she's the investigative supervisor, and so an intake will come in to say, why did you take down in Austin? And they will evaluate the case down there, sign a case with call priority, and then they send it up to whatever county the case comes in. So Hill County, Katie's unit gets it. And they will investigate, they will do their job, they will look for alternative means to keep children within the home if it's safe to do so. If and when they decide they need legal assistance, that's where I'm. So the department, Katie's unit will reach out to me saying, hey, I think we have this case that we'd like to file with the court and ask the judge of the court to enter what's called emergency ex parte court. And that's an initial order that comes down, allowing the department to take temporary custody of a child or children until we can get to court about 14 days later and have a full-on hearing of evidence. So the court can determine whether or not the children need to stay in the temporary custody of the department while the case moves forward through, so the parents can help, get services like trying to become drug-free. And that's what I do. And then I keep the case once it comes, the investigation is finished, and if the case continues into the court system, I will represent the department. They are my clients, the big entity in the state of Texas. And I will come to court and present their position on the legal end. And then I do also provide legal guidance behind the scenes. We're attorneys, and all attorneys are attorneys and counselors involved. And so a lot of times I will give my legal counsel privately to my client so they can make an informed decision on how to proceed. That could be things like traditionally how Florida is ruled, how certain facts may apply to certain areas of the law, those types of things. And that's what any attorney would do, whether they're representing a person or an entity. And CPS cases have a lot of moving parts. I call them a living, breathing case because they change every moment. And we generally have a year to work with the parent and try to read it. And I am a big believer in, as an attorney, and keeping families together whenever possible. So even as an attorney, I represent the department. It's never a fun day, even in my world, when we have a topic problems. That to me should be the last resort. Kids, they want to be with their parents, they want to be with their families, cousins, uncles, brothers, and that really, if at all possible, is the best situation. I enjoy working with CASA. I appreciate them. They are wonderful advocates for children. They don't have as many cases as a lot of our case members have, and provide more attention. They can bring attention to the court and to the child's attorney and to the department. They need clothes. Are they following kind of school? Is the placement where they're at a safe placement? Do we need to take another look at that and see, are the children being taken care of while their parents are fine, getting together to hopefully get their kids back? Process also helps the department and sometimes providing space for parent-child visits. All we have is an office with one room and a conference room. So the visit can't be at like a park or dolls or place like that. Process can on that. They even help parents sometimes fill out forms for things like food stamps and for going back to school and to get, SSI if they need help writing in by filling out the actual form. I think they're just wonderful advocates for the kids, and I appreciate they reach out to me quite a bit. The loop, I appreciate that because I can't be an effective attorney without all the information.
So something you said in there, can you give us the definition of ex parte?
Yes. Ex parte means basically, in layman's terms, is we get to go straight to. So normally when attorneys file a document, like let's say a lawsuit, if you're in a car wreck, you file a lawsuit, your person is the plaintiff and the person that's defending themselves is the defendant. In CPS law, it's a petitioner, and CPS is always a petitioner. We are petitioning the court to give us something. And the respondent or the parents are responding to, we're saying, hey, we're gonna bring your children to foster care, and they get to respond. So I'll file a petition, what's called a petition, which is a legal document with the court, and request what's called ex parte. And the judge will look at the evidence such as an affidavit and sometimes testimony from the investigations. Person and supervisor to make a determination if on that date there's sufficient evidence to have the children remain in the temporary custody of CPS under the legal guidelines about the family code. And that's the reason we don't have to notify the other party, we get to go straight to the court. And that's why there has to be a hearing, within 14 days. Because it's a temporary, there's no time to have a hearing, this needs to happen now, or the kids are not gonna be safe. And that's kind of what ex parte is. We don't have, and for the regular hearing, parents get notice, they get to come before, they have, sometimes we'll have a postmark from an attorney. And that's when the official process is keeping on TV and other court cases that you may have watched now. Ex parte is kind of like, get in there for emergency.
All right, thank you. All right, back down to Katie, putting you back in the hot seat. Okay. So how do you support families through the investigations process, even if there's been harm done?
Well, I mean, I think the big answer to that is, in a general stance, is that it's our role to help them be a part of making a safe plan for their children. So even if things are terrible at home, the first thing we're going to do to a parent or family is to say, let's come up with a solution with you. So what resources, what supports do you have that we can pull into place to make a plan that's going to keep kids safe, in essence, so that the department doesn't have to do it for you. But we're going to start out as an advocate for the whole family until we can't. Because the child's safety is number one. And so if we can get them to see that we want to partner with them first, that typically comes out with better outcomes, no matter what the situation is, whether it turns into a closed case or whether it turns into a removal and we're in the court system. If we can get them to see that we want to support them in making safe choices as opposed to being, what people see as just this kind of hammer down, and we're going to take everybody's kids, which is not what we do. But we want them to know that we want them to be a part of making decisions first.
So what barriers do you face when trying to connect families to services or support here in Hilton?
The services. Because we are a rural area, again, in all three of the counties that I cover are all rural areas, and the biggest issue is having services available for people to participate in. Most people on the outside would not believe or understand how difficult it is to find a parenting class for a parent to go to, whether we're in the court system or whether we're not. But once a removal happens, the department has contracts. We pay the people for those services, through different avenues or whatever. But we oftentimes have a hard time finding a counselor for somebody to go to that doesn't have a waiting list, or that's just not time sensitive. But having the actual resources available to send parents to is one of the biggest hurdles.
What are the most difficult parts of your job emotionally?
Well, I mean, I think my first answer to that would be 26 years of other people's trauma. That's probably the blanket answer. There are times where I have to hold back tears. And for a while there, I was facilitating family team meetings, and there were times where I, shed a tear in a meeting with a family, because there are some families who just want to work really hard to fix problems and they just can't do it. And there are some families who have tons of support, they think, and then when it comes down to helping them with their children, they all run away. They say no, they don't help. And that's, I come from a family that's very strong and, you know, maybe leave it to Beaverish, you know? We're not perfect by any means, but, you know, have support and two-parent household and all those things. But a lot of our families don't have that, and it's sad, and it's sad to see. It's hard to have those discussions with people. But, you know, just carrying around the decisions that you have to make for other people. But, you know, I use prayer and rely on other people to pray for me, hopefully. To always make sure that I'm trying to make the best decision for the kids that we serve.
Is there anything else you think that future CASA advocates doing this training need to know as they embark through this will be in their last class and they're finishing it up and they're ready to get sworn in by Judge Frank?
I would say ask questions and read. Read the case when it's time for you to get appointed to a case. You know, come to our office, read everything that you're allowed to see and read other cases before it's time for you to be assigned a case so that you can kind of learn the flow and unfortunately learn the language, because there are lots of acronyms and things that people talk about that I know a lot of times people come up to me later and say, could you explain that to me? I have no idea what you just said. And so I think asking questions about that so that you don't walk around confused about what's happening. And honestly, I very rarely meet anybody in this realm who won't spend the time to sit down and talk to you about what's going on. And I think it's okay for you guys to ask questions about why the department is doing what the department is doing. Just like Judge Crane said, you know, there's different parts and they all have different opinions. But it's okay to try to understand where our opinion is coming from. And so I think that just comes with asking questions.
Thank you. All right. What do you wish more people understood about the child welfare court system?
It is not perfect. It is, and I think Mary said earlier, there's a lot of moving parts. You kind of have to, a lot of times, meet the parents where they are, and there's no ideal situation. There's none of these cases are cookie cutter. And so we are, for lack of a better term, I've told my wife this many times, we are looking for C minus parent a lot of times. And that's sad, but that's the truth. And sometimes there is not a great solution to the problem. And that's probably the hardest thing as a judge, to try to place a child or approve a placement like CWAP or something of that nature, and knowing that it's not a good fit for that kid, but you don't have any other option. And that's tough. And you've signed your name, recommend that. That's hard for me. So it's not perfect. Everybody is really truly trying to do what is best for the child and trying to help the best they can in the circumstances. And nobody wants to see, nobody's rooting against the parents or rooting against the child. Nobody wants every case to succeed. But unfortunately, a lot of times that just doesn't happen.
Without disclosing specifics, what is a case or moment that stayed with you throughout your time on the bench?
Well, this kind of goes back to not having a good voice, so to speak. One child was their parents. And basically, this child grew up with the system. And this child has been in more placements than I can count on the top of my head. And I don't know if it's the result of the situation that she was originally in. Don't know if it's the result of the numerous placements that she's been in. I don't know if it's a result of something that I didn't do, or I didn't see, or the department didn't do, or didn't see, or a lot of them don't know the answer. If this child is completely lost. And to me, that falls back on one day. And I don't have a good answer, and I feel responsible for it. So I would say that's probably one of the hardest things. And then again, it goes to situations where you don't have a good option.
What advice would you give a new CASA volunteer, as they begin their first case?
To expand on what Katie said a moment ago, as far as learning terminology, know the process, know the core process. You have an adversary hearing. You have a 60 days later, you have a status hearing. 120 days later, you have a permanency hearing. You have a permanency before filing. So you need to know the steps and the timetables about. You need to know the terminology. You need to know everybody's role. And so not only knowing the facts of the case, which is ultimately the most important part, but you also need to know where you're headed, how fast or how much time you have to get there. I think that's a very practically though, as far as why do people get involved to be a CASA advocate, I think that they're looking for something in their lives. They're looking to make a difference in their community. And I will say that anything that I've ever done that has been worthwhile, or I look back and say, I'm glad I did that. Whether that was competing on a sports team, or going to law school, or whatever it may be. When I look back at those times, there were some very challenging times. There were some difficult times. There are times that I wanted to quit. And I just think that this is going to be that there's going to be times in these cases where you're going to get so frustrated, you don't agree with what they're saying, or they're lying. You're not going to agree. You're going to want to, but you got to stick it out. And you got to learn from it and use that knowledge for future cases, because some cases are going to end up great, and some cases are not. And you got to take the good with the bad, but you got to focus on the good. And then you got to keep a hope, because you're going to get more out of this than you think you are when you help that kid, and that kid finds, whether it's reunification with a parent after 12 months of struggling, or reunification with a family that loves them and adopts them after 2 years. Those are the ones that make you do the good.
Stephanie, what factors carry the most legal weight when you're advocating for a permanent placement or reunification for the child?
Carry the most weight.
Mhm.
I mean, I think you're looking for stability. These kids usually are removed because the household is not stable. So you're looking for some place that's safe, that's stable, that will meet them where they are at that point in time. Can't expect here when the kid's just here. So you've got to have parents that are willing to, foster parents, relatives, whatever, to meet them where they are and provide that stability and safety that they need to go through, like I said, it might be 12 months.
Okay. Well, here's a good one. If you could change one thing about the child welfare court process, what would it be?
I don't know, this court process, it's just, really going back to we need more foster parents, especially for older children. That's would be the one thing that I would like to change. I can't ever, there's no magic wand, and sometimes we do, we feel like we've lost kids because we don't have families that want to take these struggling teenagers that are hard to raise anyway without the trauma and the problems that they've been through. And there's just no really good solution. I think that is the biggest hurdle. Because I've had some teenagers and they've turned out, some of them turned out good and some of them turned out bad. And you feel like You failed them and you can't save them.
How do you, oh, go ahead.
I would check some of the laws.
Or the policies.
Some of these silly findings that you have to make. Well, actually. And that would be my biggest.
What keeps you motivated doing this work with these kids?
I think the motivation is getting to the end of the case and either seeing the child be reunified or adopted or, you know, been with that child for that long and to see them succeed and happy is through the struggles, you know, that's rewarding you to do it again.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. Dana, your turn again. How has being a CASA changed your perspective or impacted your life?
Definitely have learned that, like Katie was saying, that my family seems very stable and to see that other people struggle. That there really is a struggle out there with these families. So it's not at all how I grew up. My family was, it's been hard. Then definitely life lesson.
So what advice would you give a new CASA volunteer as they're about to embark on their first case?
Just follow your heart, just do what you feel is right. Like I said, talk to them, learn what the attorneys do, and what the judge does, and what the process do, because you'll need them. You need everybody in there to help get these kids where they need to be, where they're going to be stable and safe, whether it's going back, getting their parents through a program or parenting classes or the drug program to get their kids back, or working with their grade aunts, or just the victim camp that is just that you hunted down and found so that they could have someplace to stay. Just learn, read. It's all good, good advice.
All right, Mary, anything else you want to add?
I can, I guess, speak to, from a legal standpoint, what I would hope that CASA volunteers would take also from this as well, is y'all play a very important role in these kids' lives. And this is a hard job. You have a hard job. The judge has a hard job. So it's just, we all have hard jobs because they're emotional. Because you're dealing with kids who, no matter what their circumstances are, they went to sleep somewhere the night before, and the next day, government is their parent. And the government does not make a good parent. We don't. And we don't want to be good parents unless we absolutely have to. And so the kids are gonna either be shut down, and that's to be expected, or some kids assimilate pretty well, be resilient, some really struggle. And it is hard to watch and see, so please be patient with that, because each and every one of you and anyone in the future is gonna become a process is an important part of this child's life. A lot of times the CASA volunteer for this child will be the most stable thing they have throughout this process. Because yes, workers have a lot of cases. Sometimes we go in ebbs and flows, and we have a lot of workers, and we go with some, and we don't have a lot of workers. And as much as we like to, we just can't be everywhere all the time. And even though I don't work directly with parents or with kids, because I was the attorney, I present the case. But I would encourage anyone who wants to be a part of the process to volunteer, because you can make a difference. And I, for one, as an attorney, appreciate the CASA and the players.
All right, does anybody else have anything they'd like to add before we wrap up?
Would you say if you're gonna be a volunteer, make the kid a problem? As Mary said, a lot of times CASA is the most stable portion of their lives. I'm not saying they have to be the ultimate power, but they need to know they're empowered. They need to be loved, and earn that, develop the trust. So that they know what that looks like.
I will just add to that to say, the reality is that you guys as CASA have more of an opportunity to have a lifelong relationship with some of these children than any of the rest of us. And that's actually the hope, right? I mean, the department wants to go away. And, you know, I tell people all the time, I hope I never see you again, and that's the nicest thing I can say to you, right? It's not a bad thing, you know, but we hope that we don't see them again. But you guys can forge those relationships that can last, you know, well beyond the case. And that's someone that these kids know, hey, I can always call that person. Even if my world starts to fall apart some other way, I can reach out to that one person.
All right, well, I'm gonna stop the recording. Great. Well, I'm here with DeAndrea Petty, and DeAndrea, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do within our CPS CASA world?
Okay, so I'm DeAndrea Petty. I am a native of Marlin, Texas. Um, my office is in Waco. I actually have a second one in Marlin as well. In regards to CPS, I sometimes have a dual role. Sometimes I represent parents, and sometimes I represent children. Just depends on where everybody else is in cases and where my name falls on the wheel.
Wonderful. We're so glad to have you talking about your role here on our panel. So this panel will go on our YouTube channel for our advocates for future training, but it also is shown to advocates who are in pre-service training. So brand new baby advocates who haven't even gotten their first case yet. So it kind of helps them understand who all the players are and what their roles are. So first question, describe your role as a parent's attorney on child welfare cases and how it kind of differs from all the other parties, so CPS, CASA, and then the child's attorney.
Okay, so as the parent's attorney, how I explain it to parents is they're the middleman. And so I do criminal also, and in criminal law and usually any other law, the attorney stands in the middle and talks to everybody and tells the client what to do. In CPS, the parents are normally in closer contact with the caseworkers and with CASA. And so what we have to do is we explain the law to them. We help them go through services, explaining what they have to do. If a parent says, you know, hey, I have an issue with the caseworker, or I don't know if I can talk to CASA, what am I supposed to do? Then we sit down with them, we talk to them, we explain to them, this is what you tell them. And so it's always put out. The department, CASA, they're not your attorneys, but they're there to help you. So if they're asking you to do something or say something, say okay, and then get with me and we'll determine if that's the right way, the wrong way, or what's going on. My job also includes advocating for them in court, just like the state does for the case in general. The child's attorney does for the child, is to ensure that my client is being heard, ensure that the judge is clear on what my client has done or needs to do.
So how do you balance advocating for your client's rights with a child's need for safety and permanency?
I explain to clients that it's always best interest of the child that comes first with CPS, that comes first with the court. So what I let them know is when you're working your services and you're doing what you need to do, you're proving to the court and to the department that your lifestyle and the things that you're doing is putting your child's best interest first. So when I have a parent who says, you know, I can't find a job or I don't have a place to live, I always remind them, you know, let's keep looking, let's keep working, because a child can't come home and they don't know if they're going to eat. A child can't come home to no home. And
Yeah.
so I try to balance this is what the parent is doing, this is why it doesn't harm the child. However, when it comes to my position, when I'm not the child's attorney, I don't argue the best interest of the child in court. That's for the ad litem to do. So solely focus on my client and why my client should have their child returned, and I leave the best interest side to the ad litem and to the department. And then, of course, if we go to trial, I pull that best interest back in by looking at the law and looking at the code as to why separation or termination of a parent's rights would not be in the best interest.
So what do you think some of the biggest legal challenges that a parent faces on a CPS case once it's opened?
The possibility of a criminal case. That
Okay.
is the biggest. And it's hard to tell parents when there's a possibility that they're going to have a criminal, usually a child endangerment case, a child negligence case. Once you're over that and they get to a place that they're like, okay, nothing else is going to happen. The next thing is getting clients to understand what normally happens is if we're not appointed prior to the adversary hearing, the biggest thing is, I don't think it was right that they moved my child. I don't think, and it's explaining to them, once you went to the adversary hearing and you agreed to work services, you've now left that to be kind of a mute argument. However, sometimes there's things there we can look at, go back and say, okay, look, department, this, and this, and work it out.
Right.
But I would say that biggest hurdle is the potential new criminal case. And then after that, of course, is your rights being legally terminated from your child.
How do you support clients who may be dealing with issues like addiction or mental health while still holding the system accountable to legal standards?
So most of the time, when it comes to substance abuse, it is trying to push the client to make it to rehab, to listen to them and to determine, is this really a person that if we just got them into outpatient, that they would do fine versus them losing everything and going to inpatient. And so in that arena, sometimes the fight comes in having to go to court, making the state say, hey, wait, slow down. And the judge saying, maybe this person should be able to try outpatient. So yes, having the state be able to do what they want and obtain what they want, but also putting that client's interest and looking at the whole picture. The department, the caseworker may not always be able to see or have the time to sit down and hear from a parent to say, it's not that I don't want to, but if I do, I'm going to lose everything. So being able to put that up. When it comes to mental health is harder to sometimes work with than substance abuse. Substance abuse, parents have a tendency to, if I use, and they'll just fall off. They won't say anything. You'll know what's going on. With mental health, you never know. You may have a person that you talk to them today and they're sweet and they're bubbly and they have all the hope in the world. You may talk to them later that day or the next day and everything's wrong, everything's off. A lot of times they don't feel like the medication that they've had has worked. So in that, it takes digging into a new place and saying, okay, we got to try to figure out how to get them to a psychiatric doctor or to do their psychological, so someone else can say, hey, in that profession, this is what you need and we think it'll help. And so balancing the two can sometimes be tedious because we're on a short time frame. And so I don't believe the law has changed. And if it has, forgive me if I'm misspeaking, but normally a parent's rights cannot be terminated just because they lack the mental capacity. Now, that does not mean a child may not need to be back in the home with that parent. It just may mean that their rights, they may have to be joint management conservative with someone else or possessory. So there's certain standards that we have to look at before determining or allowing the department to determine outright termination. So just knowing where the client's issues are and knowing where the law is and what the department can do.
Well, I wouldn't know if the law has changed or not. That's
I
your
haven't,
area. That's your area of
yes,
expertise.
I haven't had anyone in the last couple of years that mental health was the biggest. It really is normally drug abuse that tends to be the biggest
Yes.
portion of issues.
Yeah.
I did have a lady back before Judge Crane went back into this courtroom that she had been in an accident and she mentally was maybe a 8 or 9 year old. And so talking about juggling some stuff, she had a caretaker, and I don't feel the caretaker was there for the right reason. And
Mm,
so it was pulling teeth, getting the woman to bring my client to court, and we ended up having to subpoena her. And in doing that, I had to balance with the department, what do we do? How do we make this work? Because she couldn't terminate her own rights. She didn't know. And so
right.
sometimes as the parent's attorney, I can also turn into an ad litem for the parent. So like a child's attorney, I say this is what's in the best interest, this is what's needed, can sometimes trump the parent in decision making. That doesn't happen often, but that is another battle that we have to go through, as well as when I go from just being your attorney, you work your case, to now I'm the ad litem and I have to treat you like you're a child when you're a legal adult.
Right. That is a heavy balance. I think we've only had a handful of those kind of cases since I've
Yes.
come on board here. So, how do you view the role of CASA in these cases?
CASA is a help, an extra pair of eyes, as a attorney ad litem for kids, sometimes balancing CPS cases, balancing criminal cases and life in general. I don't always get out as often to see kids as CASA has the ability to. So the role is very valuable because where I look at the legal best interest. You all get to look at best interest and child's wants, which sometimes are the same and sometimes a little bit different. So it's good to have someone to be able to say, all right, Miss Petty has to look at the legal side, and the legal side may be one way, but we can come in as CASA and say, this is what the child wants. So an extra person to say, hey, this is what kid wants, what kid desires, and also be able to piggyback on best interest.
So, kind of continuing down that road, what kind of communication or collaboration is most helpful for you from CASA?
Um, I most advocates on the cases that I'm on, they'll email and say, "Hey, I just want you to know I saw the child today. This is what's going on, or this is my concern." It's extremely helpful because sometimes there'll be things going on with placement that the caseworker is trying to handle on the department side of things, and they won't say, hey, this is going on. CASA will say, hey, Miss Petty, don't know if you know, but the placement is doing blah blah blah, and I just think someone needs to know. That helps me to challenge and say, hey, what's going on? Because that could change where my updates to the court what the update to the court is. If I have a placement who's doing the complete opposite of what the department is asking, and no one is saying anything, and the department says, hey, I want to remove this child. If I don't know there's an issue, I'm going to say, well, Judge, I can't agree because I didn't know. So
Right.
it's very helpful. Emails, text, I've gotten text. And then, of course, the good old fashioned telephone call.
So, what about on the parent's attorney side? What do you find most helpful for as far as communication from CASA and collaboration?
I'd say on the parent side, if CASA has a issue, the advocates are very good at emailing and say, hey, Miss Petty, I was at the visit, saw blah, blah, blah. I just wanted you to know that it's a concern of mine. It opens the door to be able to say, hey, parent, don't know if you realize this, but this was brought up. Can you tell me what was going on? It also is helpful. Clients have one person usually that has their back, and that's their attorney. To them, my child has everybody. has the department's attorney, it has the caseworker, it has an attorney ad litem, it has CASA, and here I am fighting by myself, fighting a group of people. Whenever an advocate asks, can I speak to your client, or do I have permission? I tell clients, they're not your attorney. They're here to get the best interest of your child and your child's wants and desires, but they're also there sometimes to help you. If they see you have a need and they can meet that need, they're going to try to do that. And so the communication there is always great, because I'll have someone to say, hey, parent didn't quite take this right, but this is what I meant. Can you explain it to them? So it's helpful, email, text, phone calls, even to my clients, to let them know we may not be solely in your corner in the very beginning, but we want to be there before the end of this case.
My car decided to auto shut off, so I had to turn
Oh.
it back on. Oh, goodness. So what do you wish that CASA understood better about the parents, your clients, and the work that you're doing on their behalf?
Um, I don't know that here lately it's been a thing. Sometimes, but I guess this is across the board, because even with caseworkers, not even just with CASA, when people are new to what their role and what's going on, we read a paper about, and I say a paper, the affidavit, that tells us why this child is removed. Sometimes it has criminal history, sometimes it has CPS history. I think sometimes the newer advocates, like newer caseworkers and probably newer attorneys, look at it and say, oh my God, this is the worst person ever, and this child doesn't need to be there, and da. It's taking that initiative to take a deep breath and say, if I was in this situation, even given what I'm seeing on paper, do I want the paper to lead or my relationship and conversations? So I would say, just especially newer advocates, know that just because that affidavit may say all these things that just seem so bad, um, try to have that conversation. Of course, don't put stuff in harm's way. Because even as a child's attorney, there's some homes that I don't go to alone. I'll go with the CASA advocate, I'll go with the department caseworker. I just don't go alone. But to build that rapport, even if it's just text message, email, phone call, get to know that parent. And that way you then have the idea of, okay, this parent may have done this or may say this because of this versus that. Also know that some attorneys, they just don't want anyone talking to their client. So don't take that to heart that, oh, they're hiding something, or they don't like me, or they're being mean. Some clients like me don't know when to stop talking. And they may tell you something that they shouldn't say, and you may repeat it, not realizing it may hurt them or make them look a certain way. So just understanding that there are some things that we as attorneys may tell our client, don't tell anyone, because they're not privy to the client privilege, may not be something you want someone to know, or it may be taken the wrong way. So just understanding that though CPS is not as always formal as other cases, we still have certain duties and laws and rights we have to protect for clients.
Right. So in your opinion, and this is one of those, in a perfect world, what needs to change to better support parents working towards reunification?
In a perfect world would be probably the problem. I think when it comes to reunification, when it comes to what we look for as everyday people is not what the next person may live. So there have been conversations before amongst attorneys, is they're looking for Leave It to Beaver. They're looking for the Brady Bunch. And you're not going to get it from some of these families. If you were to walk into my home, I sometimes I read reports as to why a parent's house didn't pass, and I'm like, don't come in my house. because that refrigerator is probably nothing in it because I eat out and this and that. I think in a perfect world would be to allow people to be unperfect, to realize my clean is not your clean, though sometimes that unclean is real, real unclean. And it needs to be addressed. But knowing to say a parent, I've heard the department say, oh, they don't have a support system. There's a lot of people in the world without a support system. That doesn't mean they can't have their child back. So just realizing and paying attention to not everybody has the same background and upbringing and understanding, and being able to say, okay, if I was in this situation, does this look normal? And okay, if that looks normal and it's not, how do we politely and lovingly say, hey, I know you may have done this way your whole life. Let's try this. I think sometimes parents are talked at and not talked to. So a perfect world would be to talk to them and get an understanding and try to morph into how do we make this parent better.
That's kind of getting me, Deandra. That's really good stuff. That's good stuff. As it's hard to read the paper and separate the affidavit from the person and realize we're learning, staff is learning all about TBRI and trauma and how that parent's trauma is affecting them now as they parent, and remembering that they too were a child from a hard place maybe, and giving them that grace and space to make progress over perfection.
Yes.
Good
And
stuff.
you'd be for the newer I want to say caseworkers, the newer advocates, I would say like really ask questions, because like you said, I had a mother, not even a CPS case. I had a mother in a criminal case that her daughter was working services for CPS. The daughter had been in CPS. My client had been raised in foster care. So sometimes it's just a cycle. And so it takes one person, the right person, to say the right words to someone. And sometimes it's not to that parent. Sometimes it's to the child to say, you don't ever have to go through this again. You don't ever have to be in this situation again, to make that change and make that difference.
Yeah. How do you think that the broader Hill County community can be more supportive of families involved in the child welfare system?
So multi areas. So some employers are very good. I hear clients say, oh, I talked to my supervisor. They said they understand. Whenever I have to do a UA, when I have to do a visit, they'll let me leave and come back. We need more of that. My usually male clients who work in places that I guess more factory style working and things of that nature, they have points. And they're like, if I leave early, I lose points. I've had many of clients lose their jobs because it's like, do I fight for my child? Or do I fight for my job? I think people in human resources, in management roles, that they all, and I know it's hard, we're all short staffed, people aren't working, we don't know why. But to know, if you were a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or a child who was going through CPS custody, would you want someone to fire you or your loved one or your parent because they're trying to work services to get their child back? I think if the community had a better understanding of what all came with CPS before having to be involved themselves, that would be very helpful for parents. And of course, anyone who's willing and able to be a CASA advocate, who's willing to say, hey, I want to stand in and help some child. I want to be someone that they can look at and say, I remember when I was 6, Miss So-and-so told me this, or Mr. So-and-so told me that, and it stuck with me. And that's what everyone needs and our children need. When I grew up, it takes a village. It still takes that village. Why the
It
village
does.
is falling apart, don't know. But the community coming together and being a support, not just for kids, but family members. If someone you work with or or you go to church with is struggling with their mental health or substance abuse, don't shun them. Try to help them get the help before they ever make it this far.
Yes, yes. So, just kind of going to wrap it up here with one last story question. So, what's one case or a moment that stuck with you and kind of shaped how you approach CPS cases, whether it was as a parent's attorney or a child's attorney?
Um, one. Let me think. Um,
You can share two if you need to.
okay. I might try to morph, not just give one, but kind of I would say on both sides, that's the child's attorney and the parent's attorney. The dilemma of the department trying to, so I could probably do this both ways. So I was a child's attorney, and child loved parent, loved wholeheartedly. Parent loved child wholeheartedly. Parent had some mental health issues that were not founded. And that's the craziest thing. But no one could ever really depict what was going on. And the actions of the parent, long term, could have put the child in danger. But nothing really at that moment was a danger to the child, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
It made me look at the department differently because they were actively trying to figure out, how do we keep this family together by keeping this child safe. And the first time that the child was removed, they worked it out. Child was ready to go home. Child went home. Immediate removal, not too terribly long thereafter. And the department's like, it's the same old, same old. When we're gone, there's no help. And we can't leave a child. We can't just keep going back and forth, back and forth. So in that, it made me look differently at, sometimes the department has done all they can and they're wanting unification with a family, but not the way the parent wants. And it gets to a place to, best interest of the child is always going to trump. And
Mhm.
if the child wants to go home, parent wants the child to come home, but the situation is dangerous, that's not in the best interest of a child.
Right.
So that one particular case kind of opened my eyes to, sometimes we as parents attorneys and even child attorneys have to realize sometimes it's just not going to work the way we want, and to try to get everybody on the same page. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. And that's where the jury trial or the bench trial comes in.
Yes. What about as a parent's attorney? Any moment that really shaped how you work with your parents?
I would say the one I spoke about earlier, the parent where I had to do the dual role.
Hmm.
I realized then that sometimes grown people need somebody to talk to them like they're a child, and to advocate for them as though they were a child. So I would say that particular case. And then my very first CPS case, I almost thought I would never do. What was my second CPS? It was, so when I first started, there was more family-based services than it
Hmm.
was actual removal. So my first actual removal, um, parents struggled strongly with substance abuse and would threaten the caseworker and myself and say, I'm going to go postal. And that's all she would say. So we didn't know if she was going to shoot us or what she was going to do. And I thought, I'm never doing this again. When this case is over, it's over. And I realized from that case, some parents know I'm not where I need to be.
Hmm.
I can't take care of my child, but I can't say that out loud. They don't want to feel like a failure. They don't want to feel like a bad parent. And so sometimes they will push blame. Sometimes they will be hostile. Sometimes they just will go silent. And it's not because they don't care or they're mean or they're evil. They don't know that it's okay to say, I can't do this.
Mhm.
They don't know it's okay to say it's 100% in my child's best interest that they be in foster placement or they be adopted, or my mother or sister or whoever has custody of them. They've been taught by whoever, whether it's self-taught or someone else, that you're a bad parent if you can't keep your child. And I've told many parents, you know, the greatest love is of a mother and of a parent. And if you as a parent say, my child's allergic to peanuts, my child loves peanuts, and I know they love peanut M&Ms, I'm not going to give them the M&Ms with peanuts because they're allergic. That would be detrimental. If you know that your lifestyle and what you have going on is dangerous and detrimental to them, you're protecting them just like if you were keeping them from peanuts.
Right.
It's a bigger scope, it's a different arena, but sometimes parents have said, oh, okay. And you get a different response. You get a parent to then say, you know what, I'm not ready. And I do think this is best. And once they realize no one's judging them, everyone's here to see their best interest is done. Sometimes that's better.
Yeah. Well, Deandra, thank you so much for taking some time this morning with me. I appreciate it. And I know this is going to benefit current and future advocates as they learn about their roles. So we enjoy working with you on both sides as parents attorney and child's attorney. So I really appreciate that you got on here with me. So I hope you have a great day.
Yes, you too. Thank you. I enjoy working with you all as well.
Let's see.